So here I'm playing Halo Infinite on two Xbox Series X consoles, hooked up to two LG C1 OLEDs. The one on your left is playing in Dolby Vision, the one on your right is playing in HDR10. Hopefully you can see that the Dolby Vision presentation was dimmer, flatter, more washed out and less saturated than playing in vanilla HDR, not only on the title screen, but also in the campaign. I will just leave this side-by-side comparison running for a bit. Next, let's compare Dolby Vision versus HDR in the weapons training tutorial of Halo Infinite. I've purposely avoided picking up the weapon so that the countdown timer doesn't start, not because I don't know how to play the game. The broken Dolby Vision presentation was also evident in any of the custom game maps. I'm playing solo because I want some peace and quiet to do my analysis, not because I'm afraid of competition. Using a Canon reference monitor to analyze the Dolby Vision output of Halo Infinite from the Xbox Series X when connected to an LG OLED television, it seemed that peak brightness was set to around 300 nits, with a very slightly elevated black floor as well. Note that when played in Dolby Vision, you only have a brightness slider on the video calibration screen in Halo Infinite, which lets you adjust the video black level inside the game. Decreasing the brightness value would deepen the blacks, but also start crushing shadow detail, while bumping up brightness above 0 would just make the blacks appear murky without any increase in shadow detail, while the peak brightness in Dolby Vision remained fixed at 340 nits. Going into the campaign, I quite like using the flashlight, I mean the torch, obviously, as a good indicator of what the game is targeting in terms of peak brightness. When played in Dolby Vision from the Xbox Series X, the flashlight measured between 300 to 400 nits, jumping to around 600 nits fleetingly at different angles. Continuing further along the storyline, these light sources in the first mission again hovered around 400 nits in Dolby Vision, with some specular highlights occasionally hitting 600 nits depending on the angle of the camera. In this weapons training tutorial, peak brightness was around 300 to 400 nits in Dolby Vision, and if we go into this custom map called Behemoth, I would like to thank my colleague Adam Fairclough, also known as Evil Boris Online, for suggesting this map. You can see that the sun and also the reflections on this towering structure were kept at roughly 400 nits, with rare instances going close to 600 nits. Interestingly, when we fed the edit of a Sony A90J OLED to the Xbox Series X, the peak brightness in Dolby Vision on the video calibration screen went up to 500 nits, with a corresponding increase across all segments in actual gameplay too, either in the weapons training tutorial, or in the campaign looking at the flashlight, or in the Behemoth custom map when we focused on the sun and then the reflections of the tall structure. This indicates that the console was at least partially responding to the Dolby Vision data block in the edit. We're just not sure whether the game or the console was the culprit that ended up delivering lower peak brightness in Dolby Vision. Until this issue is fixed, we strongly recommend you play Halo Infinite in HDR10 by disabling Dolby Vision for gaming. In HDR10, the in-game video calibration screen also offers an additional HDR slider which controls the tone mapping, and I'm going to tell you what's the best setting for your television. But before that, I would like to thank HDMI 2.1 cable manufacturer Zeskit for sponsoring this video. I reviewed the company's world's first certified HDMI 2.1 cables in the form of the flagship Maya series 1 year ago, and they continue to perform flawlessly when I use them in my in-depth TV testing and side-by-side comparisons. Zeskit also sells a slimmer, more flexible light series of certified HDMI 2.1 cables that pass the authentication of the HDMI cable certification app. These cables I've also tested to be excellent. If you are considering buying a certified HDMI 2.1 cable which has to be marketed as ultra high-speed HDMI cable, please support this channel by considering buying from Zeskit. I will leave the purchase link in the YouTube description below. Thanks again for your support. Right, The default HDR setting of 50 corresponds to around 1000 nits, which is a good level for most televisions without well-implemented HGIG. Decreasing the HDR value would drop the peak brightness, and the eagle-eyed among you may also have noticed the blacks going up incrementally too, leading to a more compressed dynamic range. The lowest HDR setting of 0 kept peak brightness to around 300 nits, which incidentally is what the Dolby Vision output was when connected to an LG or Sony OLED television. On the other hand, cranking up the HDR slider would increase the in-game peak brightness all the way up to the PQ ceiling of 10,000 nits at the maximum HDR setting of 100. If you own an LG OLED television with HGIG enabled, we would try to target 800 nits, which is the HGIG hard clipping point on LG OLEDs, which equates to an HDR setting of 34. We have also included a convenient table for your reference here. This way, the television won't be doing any tone mapping itself, and will instead hand over all tone mapping duties to the game and the Xbox Series X. If you can't disable tone mapping on your television, then we would just advise going with the default HDR setting of 50, which tone maps to 1000 nits. Note that on the latest build at the time we filmed this video in December 2021, regardless of whether you're playing in Dolby Vision or HDR10, the FMV or full motion video cutscenes in Halo Infinite would manifest elevated black levels with peak brightness also capped at 300 nits, suggesting that there's some sort of video versus PC level mismatch going on under the hood. At least the HDR picture looked good in actual gameplay, just as long as you don't play in Dolby Vision. The broken Dolby Vision presentation in Halo Infinite is very strange, especially considering that it's meant to be the first game with native Dolby Vision support. Maybe that's why Halo Infinite is so different from other Dolby Vision games we've previously compared side by side versus HDR10 here.